Greetings, YouTube! The Doctor is in. Dr. Urias Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons & Dragons. And today we're talking about the spell Glyph of Warding. I love this spell. I especially like this spell as a DM. We're going to give this spell an A-. It's missing one little piece that would give it an A, but it is useful for both players and it is useful for DMs, but particularly for DMs and traps and things like that. Not so much as players, but I love this spell. It's very open-ended. It lasts for a very long time, and it has a lot of flavor that comes along with it. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. And if you have any questions or comments, leave a question or comment. All right. Glyph of Warding is a third level spell. It does take an hour to cast it, so you have to take that into consideration. If you have an hour near combat as a player, this might be worth casting in specific instances, but you may not get to cast this in combat because of the hour-long time it takes to cast it. It is a range of touch. It requires verbal and somatic component, which one of those costs 200 gold pieces and is consumed. Incense and powdered diamond. So you may not be able to cast this quite a lot, but it has a duration until dispelled or triggered, and there is no concentration. So essentially, this thing lasts forever, and you can get it to cast spells that will last forever at least once. School of Abjuration and attack and saves are dex, but that is for the explosive ruins part, not for the spell glyph part. Damage effect is variable. So when you cast a spell, you inscribe a glyph that later unleashes a magical effect. You can inscribe it either on a surface or within an object. So they give examples of these, but those are only examples. They are not written in stone. So such as a table or section of floor or wall, you could put it on a door, or within an object that can be closed, such as a book or scroll or treasure chest, to conceal the glyph. You could put it on a shield that could be covered. That kind of thing. The glyph can cover an area no larger than 10 feet in diameter if the surface or object is moved. So this is an important sentence. You got to really pay attention to this sentence. If the surface or object is moved more than 10 feet from where you cast the spell, the glyph is broken and the spell ends without being triggered. So you cannot inscribe glyphs all over yourself with a spell glyph and have them trigger spells and then walk around. It doesn't work that way. Because the second you walk more than 10 feet, that you lose 200 gold pieces, essentially. So the glyph is nearly invisible and requires a successful intelligence investigation check against your spell DC. So remember, make your spell DCs very high. Most creatures and PCs do not have a very high intelligence investigation roll, especially at the DCs necessary that match the DCs of spell DCs. So these glyphs are very hard to find. You decide what triggers the glyph when you cast the spell, period. So that means it could be anything. For glyphs inscribed on surfaces, the most typical, that means it's an example. Most typical triggers include, and they're just going to give you things, touching or standing on the glyph, removing, approaching, manipulating, blah, 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 blah. But the first sentence is the most important. You decide what triggers the glyph when you cast a spell. Could be a word, could be a specific face, it doesn't matter. Could be a phrase, could be opening something, it could be touching a specific thing, it could be unlocking a latch, it doesn't matter, you decide. For glyphs inscribed within an object, the most common triggers, again, first sentence, you decide what triggers the glyph. Most common triggers include opening that object, approaching within a certain distance, or seeing. Once it's triggered, spell ends, and that's it. You can further refine, and I don't know why They give a lot of flavor in here about examples. Really, the first sentence is the most important one, and that is you decide what triggers the glyph when you cast the spell. So you can further refine the trigger so the spell activates only under certain circumstances or according to physical characteristics, height and weight, creature kind, blah, blah, blah. You also set the conditions for creatures that don't trigger the glyph, such as those who say a certain password. Okay. Again, you decide what triggers the glyph when you cast the spell, and the last sentence is you can also decide what not triggers the glyph. So you can say a creature that approaches that says the following phrase within the count of 3 will not trigger the glyph. Every other creature will trigger the glyph. Blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing. So you get to choose 2 different kinds of glyphs. Explosive Ruins, which does damage, and you decide the damage type among acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder within a 20-foot radius centered on the glyph. Dex save, 5d8 damage. You can upcast that for an extra d8 for each level above 3rd. Not as good as a fireball. Fireballs are 68, so not as good as a fireball, but almost as good, and this thing lasts forever. Or until it's triggered, of course. Half as much on a 6 health save. Or you can use a spell glyph. My favorite are spell glyphs. We're going to talk about a couple of spells that you can put in spell glyphs. My favorite are spell glyphs. So you can store a prepared 3rd level or lower spell in the glyph by casting it as part of creating the glyph. The spell must target a single creature or an area. Almost all spells target a single creature or an area. The spell stored has no immediate effect. When cast in this way, when the glyph is triggered, the stored spell is cast. If the spell has a target, it targets the creature that triggered the glyph. It has an area. The area is centered on that creature. If the spell summons hostile creatures or create harmful objects or traps, they appear as close to the intruder and attack it. And if the spell requires concentration, it lasts until the end of the full duration. No concentration needed by the caster, which is great. And then you can upcast it to include spells higher than 3rd level. So if you cast Glyph of Warding at 4th level, you can put 4th level spells in it. Glyph of Warding at 5th level, you can put 5th level spells in it. So 4 players, again, I think near combat, if you have an hour. The best use of this spell is if you are guarding an area that you don't want intruders coming into, like your home, your keep, your castle, things like that. DMs use it the same way, except it's on dungeons. And you can put these, I've actually had these put out, a lot of these put out where, the villain has scoured the land for diamonds and has crunched them up for diamond dust and has placed these all over in randomly but not necessarily randomly, but in strategic locations around like the entrance of a dungeon or the entrance of an area, and put guardians there such that these things will go off when something comes near one of the glyphs within a certain distance. And they go off, and it's mainly, and I'll get into the spell that I use, but it is extremely effective. Players will always be on their toes after you trigger one of these on them and they see it. Then they will forever think that a Glyph of Warding that has a spell in it will be around the corner. And this spell, because it can be upcast and can contain spells of higher level, does not use its utility as the campaign gets more powerful. Now let's talk about some spells that you can stick in here. So there are summon spells that you can stick in here, all the way up to Summon Fiend, which is a 6th level spell. So you call forth a fiendish spirit that you can see within range, and then it gets a stat block. You can choose this when you cast the spell. We've got, so for this it's Demon, Yugoloth, or Devil, and it'll attack. So you can, I believe you can upcast this. So you could actually cast a 9th level Glyph of Warding and put a 9th level Summon Fiend in it, which would be great. Summon Draconic Spirit. You summon it in an unoccupied space within range, which in my interpretation, that's an area. summon celestial. All these, you get to choose kind of the stat block when you cast this spell based off of what level you cast the spell at. Now, summon or conjure spells, there's a bunch of different ones. Conjure elemental, conjure celestial. So you summon a celestial of challenge rating 4 or lower, which appears in an unoccupied space you can see within range. And you can choose this at the time. It gives a sample of a Pegasus, but you can choose this at the time. When you cast this spell using a 9th level, you summon a celestial of challenge rating 5 or lower instead. And there's Conjure Fey, there's Conjure Elemental. When you cast this spell using a spell slot of 6th level or higher, the challenge rating increases by 1 for each slot. So it goes all the way up to 6th level, which is an invisible stalker. And these do have material components, but this one here has a worthless material. It's very relatively worthless material component. So these are easy to cast. Now, one of my favorite spells to put into a Glyph of Warding is a Thunder Wave. And you can put this at a very high level Thunder Wave too. Now, I have a couple different reasons why I like Thunder Wave in Glyphs of Warding. Now, I gave the example of putting out a bunch of Glyphs of Warding in strategically placed areas around the entrance of a bad guy's dungeon, lair, whatever you want to call it. You could have guardians in there. I had like a ruined keep that there were some walls up. It didn't really have very much of a roof left, and there were some trolls that were layering and being guards for the main bad guy in this ruined keep. And all around the keep was in a swamp, and all around the keep were trees and rocks and things like that. And I wanted to stop the players from sneaking up on the trolls. So what I did is I strategically placed Glyphs of Warding with Thunder Waves in different areas around the keep. And then when they snuck up next to one of these to try and hide behind it using stealth, they triggered the Glyph of Warding, which immediately triggered the Thunder Wave. It blows up. It's a lot of noise. It does damage. It pushes the creature. If they fail their save, it pushes them, and they're no longer stealth at that point because they just moved. So, and the troll guardians could see them. So that's another great way of using this spell. So just some great things about this spell. I like this spell a lot. It has a lot of flavor, and that's all I got for everybody today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will catch everybody later.